Hello and welcome to the off script interview on Basis Point Insight. Today we are speaking with someone who's had a front row seat and, in many ways, a steering role in one of India's most important tax reforms, the goods and services tax. Mr. Vivek Johri, former chairman of the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, has played a key role not just in how GST was rolled out but also in shaping the legal framework and making it work across the country. He is currently Senior Advisor, Indirect Taxes at KPMG in India. Nearly 8 years on, GST has brought a lot of change and also a fair share of complexity and challenges. In this conversation, we will unpack where things stand, what needs fixing, and what a more stable, simplified GST may look like. Mr. Johri joins us in his personal capacity, offering his insights and a wide angle view of India's evolving tax framework. Welcome, Mr. Johri. Thank you so much for sparing time for us. It's a pleasure to have you with Basis Point.
Good morning, Ranjana, and thank you very much.
So let me start with a big picture question. If you had to give GST a score of out of 10 on what it set out to achieve versus where it stands today, what would that score be and why?
Okay. In my view, I would rate it at about 6 to 6.5.
Okay.
And I'll give you the reasons. So the major reasons why we went into GST were one, to integrate the national market. You're aware that there were boundaries across states, and for goods to cross and for services also to be traded across these boundaries was a challenge. Those boundaries are now gone, so that's full marks for that. Removal of cascading was another objective.
That's right.
Linked to that was the transparency, of the tax incidents, and to a great extent, because so many taxes have been rolled into one, and there is ITC available not just across goods and services, but also across the country, and both for CGST and SGST. There is a fair amount of achievement with in terms of removal of cascading and transparency of incidents. So a consumer who's paying tax at the end of the day knows exactly how much tax a particular goods or category of services bears.
Yeah.
The third thing, which is important, is simplified compliance for taxpayers. I would not give full marks there. In fact, there are a lot of challenges with that because of a dual GST that India has gone into owing to its federal structure. So that is one of the things that we need to work upon, and I have some thoughts on that which we will share a little later. Unhindered flow of ITC, I've already talked about. That was another objective. Fewer disputes. That is another area where I think we need to do a lot of work, and the regime that you currently have is not ideal, and what you set out to achieve. So dispute resolution is another big area that needs to be worked upon, and better revenue buoyancy. Yes, there are naysayers who believe that the rate of growth of revenue after GST was introduced has not improved very much. But then, in all fairness, it has also not gone down, barring the year when we had the COVID, epidemic. And because of that, by and large, I think the revenue target has also been met. There is room for improvement, and with regard to revenue efficiency also. But then it's linked to the larger issue of policy, and we'll talk about that a little later. So 6.5 on 10 is my assessment.
Actually, not bad. Uh, yeah, you spoke about ITC, input tax credit. One of the persistent pain points, and you also identify it as a work in progress there, is for businesses, especially the MSMEs, is the denial of input tax credit when the supplier fails to upload invoices. Do you think this approach is sustainable?
No, it's not. And in an ideal GST system, there should be no impediments to flow of ITC. There's no question about that. Actually, the problem is not so much with regard to you know failure to upload invoices, which is leading to denial. It has more to do with fake invoices and fake ITC, which has been a challenge and one of the downsides of implementing GST. Um, and with regard to that, in all fairness, measures have been taken. For example, we have a system of uh, invoice management, which has been introduced recently. So if there are any failures on the part of a supplier in either declaring the details of an invoice, those can be fixed through the invoice management system. Also, they've introduced a return called GSTR 1A. So if the supplier himself realizes that there has been some, a gap in uploading invoices for a particular period, he has a short window within which he can rectify that. So these measures have been taken, but it's still not perfect with regard to fake invoices. The reason being that very often these fake invoice peddlers are fly-by-night operators, and it's difficult to get hold of them. But the news has been tightened, and our ability to deal with it has emerged stronger now.
Okay. Yeah. Uh, GST law has envisioned a national appellate tribunal to ensure uniformity in rulings. But we are now in 2025 and it has still not seen the light of the day. So, what are the roadblocks and how serious is the impact of not having it?
The major roadblock to begin with was to provide what was perceived to be, an imbalanced representation of the judiciary vis-a-vis, technical members on the tribunal. That has now been resolved. And if you recall, the GST Council took a decision whereby every bench would now have two judicial and two technical members. So it's fairly balanced with regard to judicial and technical members. The advantage, of course, of having judicial members is that they have a larger sort of picture in mind, in terms of enforcement of law and interpretation of law, and they bring that competence and knowledge set to the table. So that issue has been resolved. But after that, there have been some legal challenges to the way the tribunal has been constituted. I believe those have also been resolved. Uh, the challenge currently, as I perceive, is because they're wanting to adopt a completely IT-enabled process, and that would require some software to be developed both at the back end and the front end. These are days when you have electronic or remote hearings. A person need not appear physically in a court or in a tribunal. So it's an ambitious project from that point of view, and I guess that and the creation of infrastructure is what is holding it back. If news reports are anything to go by, then the president of the GST appellate tribunal has already been appointed. Some of the members, I'm told, for the central benches have also been appointed, but the appointment of other members is underway. So I think over the next 5 6 months, I'm hopeful that tribunal would be in place. But yes, it has been delayed, and that has very negative implications for taxpayers.
One of GST's promises was one nation, one tax. But in practice, we've seen states diverge, be it in e-way bill enforcement or contradictory advance rulings. Is this a design flaw or an administrative coordination issue? And also, you've been instrumental in setting up of the national level car, the customs authority of for advanced rulings. Is it time for a similar authority for GST?
Yeah. So Ranjana, if you talk about a design flaw, I think the problem with divergence of interpretations and enforcement of law can happen even in a unitary system. So, I mean, let's acknowledge that to begin with. But I mean, there is a fundamental design flaw, if one could call it that, in going into a dual GST. And in many countries that have a federal system, one of the two, either the federal government or the state government, collects the tax on behalf of both, so that the taxpayer has to deal only with one administration at a time. Now here, the problem is compounded because you have a dual GST, and then each state is independent in its own right in enforcing and in the day-to-day operations of GST. So for the taxpayer, particularly those who have a national presence, it's a very big challenge because they have to deal with so many different tax administrations, even though the tax is the same. How do we iron this out? You rightly mentioned, advanced ruling, and this was envisaged, when the GST law itself was drafted. But over a period of time, the experience we've had has not been as good as taxpayers expected it to be because of divergences in interpretation on the same issue. Now, I think there is a resolution possible. The trade off is that if you have a national level advanced ruling authority, in the interest of having convergence and doing away with divergence of views, it becomes costly for taxpayers to access it. And we had that model in customs earlier, and we've decentralized it slightly so that there's more than one advanced ruling authority available
Yes.
to taxpayers. And that is why, in GST to begin with, we began with the state level authority. But if you want to iron out differences across advanced ruling authorities, we could follow the European model which they adopt for the customs law there, which is called the binding tariff information. So, under that, the entire procedure is IT enabled, and the advanced ruling authority is in one country in the EU, is prevented from taking up an issue which another advanced ruling authority has already pronounced on or is examining at the moment. So that minimizes the possibility of divergences in practice. So
Absolutely.
I think if we were to follow that model, these divergences would go away. But as regards the day-to-day operations of GST, there needs to be better coordination between the center and the states, and some mechanisms have already been put in place for that. But I think eventually we'll have to evolve into a system where at least the key taxpayer facing processes, for example, audits, for example, investigations, they would have to be manned by verticals comprising both center and the states at the national level so that there is uniformity of approach. And that's the way I view it, and that's a solution we can think of.
Yes, and now I come to, the most commonly cited issue related to GST. This is what all of us keep talking about. Uh, we still operate with five major GST rates plus the cesses. The industry has long asked for simplification. What's holding back this reform? And are we any closer to three rate system that has been talked about?
What is holding it up is the concern about revenue, and how to keep the exercise revenue neutral. We've had a group of ministers in place right from 21, if I recall rightly, which has been asked to look at rate rationalization. And at that time, the concern the states had was that the GST compensation cess was going to go away. And they wanted a group of ministers to look at ways and means of ensuring that the revenue buoyancy from GST is maintained post compensation cess. Um, Now, the GOM was tasked with two things.
Yeah.
One was the removal of exemptions, and to make recommendations about how to broaden the base through removal of exemptions. That part they've already completed. The report was submitted and accepted by the GST Council. In fact, those notifications have also been issued and operationalized. The second part, which is the more difficult part, of compressing the number of rates in GST, because the more the rates you have, the bigger the chances of disputes and arbitrage, and therefore, more disputes. This is not an ideal system. It's not simple for taxpayers also, particularly because very often you find that for the same class of goods, there are different rates that operate or apply, and that is perceived to be not just unfair but also perceived to be taxpayer unfriendly. So, but the challenge is if you have to compress rates, some rates have to go down. And in the past, if you recall, the discussions have floated around, a rate of 15 to 16%, because that was perceived to be the revenue neutral rate. If that is where we need to go, then the standard rate of 18%, which fetches you almost 65% or two-thirds of your revenue today, needs to go down. Even if it goes down, by 2 percentage points, the revenue loss that you incur there is quite substantial. Now, you will not be able to make that up simply by doing away with the 12% slab because it doesn't fetch you that much revenue. So even if 12 were to go, which is one of the key things that has to happen, the revenue gain that you get from that will not be enough to compensate for the loss. One way of looking at it is that if you moderate the rates, the experience worldwide and even in India has been, and you have the income tax example to go by, compliance improves, and therefore over a period of time, revenue will make up. But then, I mean, are we willing to wait for that? Are we prepared to take a short-term hit in the interest of the long-term benefit? I think those are the questions that would be troubling the minds of the GOM, and that is why it is taking time for them to come out, with a report that does a meaningful, rate rationalization. Another issue which is linked to this is the fate of the compensation cess, which is being looked into by another group of ministers, chaired by the Minister of State for Finance. That group is also yet to turn in its report, and the level of ambition with regard to rate rationalization, in my view, is linked directly to what happens to the compensation cess.
Yeah.
So if the compensation cess is there to stay, uh, the appetite for doing a rate rationalization may actually go down, and the other way around. So that is another imponderable at the moment, which is perhaps holding up the rate rationalization exercise. But I think we are nearer to a three-rate structure, and my sense is that the GOM will find a means of balancing revenue, even if there is a marginal loss of revenue in the short run, and coming out with a meaningful report.
And in this backdrop, the finance minister recently hinted, it was a public event where she hinted at the possibility of lowering GST rates. She cited improved compliance and revenue buoyancy. So, given the ongoing fiscal pressures and pending dues to states, is a GST rate cut viable at this point?
It depends on how you do the balancing. So if you're prepared to increase, the lower rate of GST, which is currently 5, and 12 also goes up to whatever is the standard rate. Plus, you're able to, identify some demerit goods which already attract a compensation cess, and enhance the rate because they're currently at 28%, which is a demerit rate. But sin goods could perhaps be identified and charged at a much higher rate, as is the case in many other countries. So there are ways of doing it. Yes.
And this comes to the current scenario. Regarding the promise to reduce GST rates, how would a potential bilateral trade agreement with the US impact the rate structures or sectoral exemptions?
In my view, the US bilateral trade agreement uh, does not have any implication for GST because GST being a domestic tax under the WTO rules, it's applied both to domestically manufactured or supplied goods and services and those that are imported or move across the border. And it's a destination based tax, so you tax imports the same way as you tax your domestic goods and services. So there is no discrimination that's there. And even the USTR's National Trade Estimates report does not refer to GST being, one of the challenges or issues that US exporters face in the Indian market. So I don't think it has an implication, nor will it figure in, and it has never done in our discussions on free trade agreement with the US.
Okay. So, one big beast still sitting outside the GST framework is petroleum. So, given how critical fuel prices are to inflation and interstate logistics, why do you think there's so much hesitation in bringing petroleum products under GST? Is it politically too sensitive or fiscally too risky for states?
Yes, it's a little bit of both. Uh, the states, all this while they were just waiting and watching how GST revenues behave. And the perception amongst the states, and perhaps rightly so, is that this is one area of indirect tax where they still have some room for maneuver and some degree of freedom in setting rates. Um, Even when we went into GST, if you recall, the states had a lot of concerns about giving up
Yes.
their sovereignty. But then the union and the states both agreed to pool their sovereignty in the larger interest of the economy, and therefore agreed to do GST. I think there's a similar concern with regard to petroleum taxes, but it is not as if a solution is not available. There are many instances around the world of having a GST on petroleum products or a VAT-like tax. What that does is it removes cascading in the economy, um, and to recoup the revenue loss, there is a supplementary excise or a sales tax or that kind of a tax sitting on top. So I think a similar solution is possible in the Indian context, and a beginning must be made somewhere. Now, if you really, I'm coming back now to rate rationalization. And one of the things that will make it easier for us to do a meaningful exercise of rate rationalization would be to expand the base.
Yeah.
Because, if, and there, for petroleum, fortunately, there is a constitutional and a legal provision already available. And the GST Council only has to determine on what date, it kicks in. So it does not require a constitutional amendment,
Okay.
and it is possible to bring petroleum, to make a beginning by expanding the base. The more you go in for base expansion, the possibility of lowering the rates is that much better. I recall that the Finance Commission chaired by Dr. Kelkar had turned in a report, of course, which was not a public report, but it was done internally for government, saying that if the entire tax base, which ought to be under GST, and that includes land, electricity, property, and so on and so forth, not of course property taxes at the municipal level, but sale of property and so on and so forth. If all these petroleum, alcohol, all these were brought under the GST net, then it's possible to have, and if you were to go in for a single rate of GST, that rate could be somewhere as low as 5 to 7%. So, I mean, that is the order of difference that expanding the base can make. So, I think it's very important for us to make a beginning in expanding the GST base.
Yes, that brings great perspective. So this brings me to my concluding question with you. If you had to pick your top priorities for GST going forward, what would be the must-have reforms that absolutely need to happen? And what would you put in the good to have or long-term wish list?
Look, in the immediate future, I feel there are two things that need to happen right away. One is the setting of the GST appellate tribunal, because we do not have an ideal system of dispute resolution. It's compelling people to go in writ petitions to high courts because you do not have an appellate tribunal, and this obviously is biased against the small taxpayer, who finds it extremely onerous to approach high courts in rich jurisdictions. So an appellate tribunal is an absolute must, and that must happen in the immediate and the short term, as I see it. The second thing, which I think is extremely important to sort of reform GST, is the rate structure. So I think the rate rationalization exercise, and going by statements and pronouncements that the finance minister herself has been making, it appears that that exercise is also well underway, and we should see the outcomes, over the next 5 6 months. It's not necessary for them to do everything in one go. It's quite possible that the council decides to do it in a phased manner, but a beginning must be made, and we must move towards rate rationalization. The third thing which needs to be done, but which is slightly medium term in my view, is much better coordination and better definition of processes within GST. Um, One of the things, or rather, two examples that I'd like to give is one of dispute resolution. It's not an ideal system in my view, where we generate a large number of disputes, we are not able to resolve them, in reasonable time, and there is a perception that the resolution at the departmental level is not fair. So either which way, the dispute resolution system has not given you outcomes that are, that align with the objectives, and therefore there needs to be a root and branch, treatment of the dispute resolution system. One of the ways in which this can be done, and it's already happening, it needs to be intensified further, is to make the institutional view on issues that are prone to disputes clear, early on, before they convert into full blown disputes. Once an institutional view through a circular or an instruction is made known, my experience is that it really disciplines the field officers a lot. They get guidance, and there is lesser possibility of there being noise in the system. So I think this is one thing. Secondly, I find even where circulars have been issued by the council to clarify matters, they're not always observed by the field formation. So you need to have a quality assurance program in place, and the council needs to turn around and see why a particular circular did not have the impact that they expected it to. How many disputes that had arisen on a particular issue actually got resolved by virtue of the circular? Were there corner situations which were not addressed in the circular? And does that therefore need to be, redone or redrafted, or supplemented with another one? Or is it because of non-observance of what is written in the circular by the field formation? So I think we need a quality assurance review. The third and final suggestion that I have is that, in the interest of more aligned processes between the center and the states, you need to have verticals, for particular business processes. So you need to have one vertical for audit, for example, which can be jointly manned by officers from the center and the states, so that the taxpayer faces one entity when they are confronted with an audit. Likewise for dispute resolution. So these are some of the things that we need to think about. And of course, I keep saying that there's no limit to how much you can invest in training and capacity building of officers, and that needs to be a continuous process, so that people specialize in certain industries. We don't have specialization today. Industries are evolving, manufacturing processes are evolving, new technologies coming up, and if the tax officers don't have a proper understanding of what business practices are, then obviously they will be hamstrung when it comes to dealing with disputes. So I think these are some of the suggestions that I have.
Yeah, that was very beautifully summed up. The need for uh, processes, smarter processes, technology, some training, some capacity building, audits, and action, and of course, bold steps. That just need to be taken gradually or whatever, but they need to be started. So that's what I guess would be the solution for this very important tax regime. So, Mr. Johri, thank you so much for such a rich and engaging conversation.
Thank you.
Given your role in shaping GST from the inside, your insights carry that much more weight. It's
Thank you.
been invaluable hearing your perspective on how far we've come and what still needs work. So we are really grateful you took the time to share your views with us. And thank you so much once again for being with Basis Point Insight.
It's been a pleasure, Ranjana. Thank you so much.
Thank you.